What I'm about to tell you now will probably blow you away. Carol Dweck, professor at Stanford University, has discovered that your beliefs about intelligence and how it works determines how smart you are. She argues that there's two general categories of belief that people hold about intelligence: a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. People who have a growth mindset believe, essentially, that intelligence is something that you grow, that you develop, that you build. Folks who have a growth mindset know that if intelligence is something that you build, then failure just means that you haven't figured something out yet. It's no big deal. So people who have a growth mindset don't get upset by their mistakes. They find their mistakes useful, that their mistakes help them to improve and get better, and they believe that intelligence is something that you improve upon. So failing a test is no big deal for people with a growth mindset because they know, oh, the way I approached that last test didn't work. I'll have to study harder or study in some different way to pass it the next time. Easy. The world looks completely different to people who have a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset is a belief that you're either born smart or dumb. It's fixed. It's already decided at birth. There's nothing you can do about it. So people who believe that intelligence is fixed, unchanging, they're constantly having to prove that they're intelligent and constantly running away from anything that might prove that they aren't intelligent in their way of thinking. So failing an exam, if you have a fixed mindset, means that you're dumb and you can't do something. So people with a fixed mindset, when they fail, they give up. Right? Think about the difference there. Imagine you're a freshman at CSUN and like everybody, their freshman year, you stumble in some class because the classes, the expectations are so different from high school. Say you fail a midterm. If you have a fixed mindset, you'll look at that failed midterm and say, oh, I don't belong in college. If you have a growth mindset, you'll look at that failure and go, oh, I guess I need to study harder or study differently or get some help. Those differences change people's lives. So, people who have a fixed mindset need to avoid failure, because if they fail at something, it means that they're dumb. It's something about them as a person rather than a stage of intellectual development. They work really hard to look smart, and the way they do that is by avoiding anything that's challenging. They only attempt things that they know they can succeed at. Criticism or feedback is very scary to people with a fixed mindset because it's like a personal insult rather than a statement about their performance at a particular point in time. Conversely, according again to Carol Dweck, people with a growth mindset try to learn their entire lives because intelligence is something you develop. They don't struggle nearly as much with failure or with uncertainty. They adapt to it. Failure is just feedback. They put a lot of effort into learning, and they take feedback and criticism as data to help them become smarter rather than as evidence that they need to leave college. So, mindset makes a huge difference in intelligence. Mistakes, failures, obstacles are not your enemy, and I'm telling you this as an old person with lots of wisdom. Mistakes can be your best friends. Everything that I'm terrible at has turned out to be beneficial in some way. I didn't know it at the time, but somewhere along the line, it turned out to be super useful. So whether you want to be an athlete or a brainiac, you need to respond to failure and to obstacles with more effort. That's all. Not admitting to your own failures will handicap you and handicap your intelligence for your whole life. Now, if you have children, the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset is fundamentally important. Oh, I forgot to say, If you are like me and you're hearing this description and you think, oh my God, I have a fixed mindset, don't panic. I had a fixed mindset. Carol Dweck had a fixed mindset. Many of us have fixed mindsets. Go onto Dweck's websites. There's all sorts of things that you can do to shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. So that too is changeable. Okay, mindset and children. Given what I just told you, you do not want to praise a child for being smart. You want to praise your children for their effort. That is critical to a growth mindset. You compliment children, you support them for trying hard, not for succeeding or failing. And if you do that, then your child will continue to try hard and they won't overreact to failure. Here's another just mind-blowing effect on intelligence. And this effect was identified and it's been studied extensively by Claude Steele, who I think now is at UC Berkeley. He was at Stanford before, and then Columbia. All the universities want him. Claude Steele studied something called stereotype threat. Now, most people hold stereotypes about how well different groups of people can do different things. White men can't play basketball, right? Women can't do math. Those stereotypes are in most people's heads. It turns out that your fear that someone else, that other people hold those stereotypes that are derogatory against you, that fear drives down your scores on intelligence tests. So stereotype threat is defined as a disruptive concern when facing a negative stereotype that will be evaluated based on that stereotype. So if I'm a woman and I'm taking a math test and I'm in a room full of guys and I'm worried that these guys are all going to think that I'm a terrible mathematician because I'm a woman, that way of thinking is actually going to drive down my performance on exams. So what Claude Steele can do is make gender and racial differences in intelligence testing disappear or reverse. Not kidding. Here we go. So let's think about different stereotype threats that different people are confronted with. Girls are bad at math. You come from a poor neighborhood, so you'll never do well. Oh, you're an athlete. Jocks are so dumb. Boys, you can't be creative. Oh, your score is low on math because you're white. Oh, you're too young. You'll never do as well as old people. Those beliefs, if you worry about other people holding those beliefs, then that stereotype that other people are holding threatens you in a way that's going to lower your performance. Let me show you some data from Claude Steele's lab. In one set of studies, he asked people to solve a number of math problems from an SAT test. And he can make racial differences on math scores for SAT tests disappear with one sentence. If he hands out the tests and says, these tests measure intelligence, then what does he find? White students can answer about twice as many of the math problems as African American students. Okay? So that's a sort of result that people use to argue that somehow African Americans are academically inferior. Oh yeah? Then how do you explain this next effect? If he gives out exactly the same test, and all he does while he's passing out the test is say that this test does not measure intelligence, now African Americans are performing better than whites. And his thinking is that that one sentence can either turn on or turn off stereotype threat, right? So if I'm worried about taking a math test because I'm a woman and he passes out a test and says, this test, men and women always perform similarly on this test, turns out my performance on that test will increase. Let me show you the data. So if Claude Steele passes out a test with a lot of SAT math problems on it, and he passes them out to a room full of men and women, and as he passes them out, he says, this test usually produces a gender difference, then the scores on those tests will be better for men than for women. But if he passes out the same test, and simply says, instead of, this test usually produces a gender difference, now he says, no gender difference has been found with this test. Now, all of a sudden, the gender difference disappears. Why? Because by saying there's no gender difference on this test, he has turned off stereotype threat. I no longer have to worry about performing more poorly because I'm a woman, because the test doesn't show gender differences. I'm going to tell you some other findings by other labs and collaborators that strengthen this argument. One set of studies looking at gender effects in math ability had women either take a math test in a room with other women students or take a math test in a room with men students. It turns out that when women take a math test in a room with no men, they score better than if they take the same math test in a room with men. Why? Because a room full of women, what's the gender stereotype going to be? Another study, this is some old friends of mine, had women, and women, if you're like me, you'll get this immediately. Trying on a bathing suit is just awful because we have these images in our heads from society about what women's bodies should look like. And those beliefs about women's bodies are unachievable, right? So for example, Barbie. Barbie has a body type that's physically impossible. If you get women to try on a bathing suit and then take a math test, they're going to stink on that math test. Okay, you might say, well, stereotype threat, yeah, but white guys, that's never going to be a problem for them. Oh yeah? Everybody experiences stereotype threat in the right setting. So this was a study that Claude Steele did at Stanford University with white engineers and Asian engineers. And the white students, when they were taking this engineering test, they were told that Asians typically outperform whites on this test. And when white men hear that Asian engineers usually perform better on a test, you know what happens to the scores of those white men? Drops. Stereotype threat. So if you think that these tests are actually measuring your God-given ability, you're wrong. Claude Steele can make those test scores change dramatically depending on what he says while he's passing out the exams. Carol Dweck can change your IQ score by changing the way you think about intelligence. Okay, why? Well, let's continue with Claude Steele. Why does that effect happen? The Yerkes-Dobson curve tells us what the relationship is between how anxious someone is and how well they'll perform on an exam. If you walk on an exam or in an athletic event, on anything really, if you walk into an exam and you don't care at all, your score is not going to be very good. If you walk into an exam and you're terrified, your score is not going to be very good. But if you walk into that exam with some anxiety, but not too much anxiety, then your performance will be at its peak. People experiencing stereotype threat feel a lot of anxiety. And because they have all that anxiety, their scores shift down with this curve. Take the anxiety away, their peak performance returns, and now all of a sudden they're scoring just as well as any other group on the standardized test. How do you overcome stereotype threat? There's a mountain of research working on that right now. One thing that people are studying is the role of role models. So when I feel like I can't do something because I'm a woman, for me, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Another way to fight stereotype threat is to nurture Carol Dweck's growth mindset. And go to her website, it's fantastic. Another way to overcome stereotype threat is to find a different way to think about the anxiety you're feeling. So say you walk into an exam and you're super anxious, and you might think, oh my God, I'm so anxious, I'm going to fail. But think about going on a roller coaster ride. That's anxiety provoking too, but that's exciting. So if you rethink your anxiety in terms of excitement, oh, I'm so excited for this exam, let's go, as if it's a roller coaster, the stereotype threat will go away. You'll have a new way of interpreting your anxiety. Good old affirmations. I'm good enough. I can do this. Believing in your own self-worth, important. And try to get rid of labels. Minimize the use of labels. Smart, dumb, good, bad. Yuck, not useful. So the take-home message on this lecture on intelligence is the following. 1, most psychologists believe that intelligence is something that is created, that is built. It is not something you're born with. 2, failure does not mean you're dumb. Failure means that's a little signal that you need to try something different, a different approach, study harder, study in a different way. It doesn't mean you're dumb. No more than the fact that a fish can't climb a mountain means a fish is dumb. That's it. Thank you so much.